is on a piece written by Fernando Sor, opus 35, number 13, entitled Estudio. And the tempo marking in the Segovia edition says allegretto, but the original tempo marking was andante, and it was in duple time. But before we begin our analysis and a look at this piece, a little bit about Fernando Sor. First off, he was born in Barcelona, Spain in 1778 and died in Paris in 1839. Over the course of Sor's life, he traveled the world. He went to Paris for a time, to London. He met his wife in Moscow. She was a ballerina. He wrote a couple ballets, and he ended his life in Paris. Sor is more than just simply a guitar composer of this time frame. He wrote a number of ballets, as I mentioned. He wrote guitar pieces and pieces for piano and pieces for an instrument which we might describe as a harp guitar. He was an innovator in terms of guitar design and really wanting to see the instrument take its rightful place next to some of the other instruments. We think of him as a classical guitar composer, that is, a composer of the classical period. But keep in mind that he was only 13 when Mozart died in 1791. And when he was performing in Paris, one of the people performing with him in a small salon concert was none other than Franz Liszt. So among his contemporaries, Liszt, Schubert, Chopin, and of course we know that one of his most admired composers was Mozart. Okay, so we're now going to turn our attention to the piece Estudio in C, opus 35, number 13. It's in 2/4 time, tempo marking is andante. The accompaniment figure has an Alberti bass, which is more characteristic of a piano than a guitar, right? We'll want to keep this in mind because that'll be an important feature in the piece, because if we compare this piece to all the pieces of music that Sor wrote for guitar, this one is one of the very few that has this kind of accompaniment figure. He was trying to, in some way, characterize Mozart. The melody is very simple, and the construction in terms of the form of the piece is what we might describe as a rounded binary form. We have an A section, which is about 16 bars long, and the B section ends with a partial quote of the A section. That's why we call it rounded binary. Let's first take a look at the melody of the piece. It sounds like this. Harmonically, this first phrase only has basically 2 chords, a C chord and a kind of G7th chord with a pedal C. And the ending of the phrase has an appogiatura, double appogiatura, with the F and D, and it resolves down to C. I'll try that one more time. The second phrase begins the same and then moves to a G chord with the harmony. The accompaniment figure in the second phrase is a little bit more complex in that we have a little counter melody in the 3rd bar of the second phrase. So here we go. Here's the counter melody. And that melody. Yes. The 3rd phrase is a repetition of the first phrase, and the 4th phrase, which completes the A section, is very much the same, except at the very ending it just arpeggiates the G chord. So what are the chief musical challenges in this first section of the piece? Well, one is to bring out the melody clearly, and more than that, to make the melody sing. It should sound as if your only job was to play that melody. So let's re-examine the melody one more time and think about the dynamics of how to make this seem as if it's being sung. The first measure of the melody is really just a C chord. It starts on Mi. Mi, do, so. Now if I was singing this, as I just did, I noticed that so was a much louder than do. So it kind of decrescendo down to do. Mi, do, so, and so was the loudest note. So one of the things we want to do is to practice just simply getting an idea of how we're going to do that on guitar so we can hear that difference in the dynamic shaping that'll make it sound as if we're vocalizing. And the appogiatura at the end, that last note, would be played softer. I'll do that one more time. So the first and third phrase both have that characteristic. The second and fourth phrase, it changes and moves to chord tones there. So B may be a little softer than the C and the third bar. So when you're playing the melody, one of the challenges will be the dynamics. The accompaniment figure in the first phrase is that Alberti bass. Sor introduces the note F, and we hear this kind of a G7th chord against the C. The F is the most important note because eventually it's going to be a double appogiatura between this note and the resolution here. So the tempo is very important. And in a Dante tempo, we will hear very clearly the harmonic tension that is being created by the F and the D against the C. And the resolution will be quite Mozartian. The second phrase, it's that bass line that again, which also needs to be shaped in a way that re, fa, mi, do, ti, so, la, ti, do. The next section begins in measure 17 with the dominant 7th chord, G7th, in the key of C. And the next measure, the second measure of the B section, has an appogiatura in the beginning that is a non-harmonic tone that has kind of a sighing quality. I'll play it as a block chord so you can kind of hear that. Now that, one more time. Then he builds up, and now then a series of appogiaturas. So it feels as if the G is sighing into the F, and then he holds these two notes, the F and the D, and these two notes are going to resolve. Just like that. So very slowly, that first 4 bar in that next phrase. And the next phrase begins the same. second to last measure has, and the bass line follows. And then we have a little cadenza that leads us chromatically at the very end to the beginning. Yeah, it's a really quite beautifully constructed piece. And although short and although simple, is thoughtfully done, including 8 bars, a restatement of the beginning, but with some surprises. Let's revisit the very beginning for just a moment to hear how he began the piece. Melodically, it went like this. And at the very end, that first phrase sounds exactly the same. But the harmony in the first 4 bars sounded like this. But this time, he does this. So he substitutes a G sharp diminished 7th chord, and then gives you an A minor with a suspension, which resolves, and then he follows that with a C sharp diminished chord and an appogiatura with the D minor in first inversion. The next chord is going to be a 1-6-4 chord, which is a C chord with a G in the bass. And then he's going to go to a G7, but first a suspension. And if the F is still holding, and ends like that. Altogether, from the restatement of the A section, our rounded binary, I hope this study has been helpful to you to get an idea of the overall structure of the piece and some of the challenges in the piece. Mainly, to be able to make the melody sing, to be able to shape the melody accordingly. We will talk a little bit about this in a separate class having to do with technique, how important it is to learn how to make the guitar sound as if it's a vocal instrument. I hope that you found this video helpful to you. If so, like and subscribe to my channel, and I look forward to seeing you soon.